And in Hong Kong, you have a few million people who are promoting, fighting, protesting to keep their sense of freedom and democracy. And there is that civilizational state, China, who, if I read the newspapers well, has a problem with those millions of people who are fighting for their freedom and democracy. What's the problem of China? Leave those people alone.
Well, they hadn't been left alone. They were ruled by Britain for a long time.
Yes. The Brits.
It's always the fault of the British.
By force, by the way, through wars, of course. Mm-hmm. And Hong Kong came back to China peacefully. Mm-hmm. So there's an important distinction here. It was taken by force, returned in peace. And that's a great achievement. And in Hong Kong, we have this structure called one country, two systems, which means that Hong Kong has this thing called the basic law. It's a mini constitution, so that it's autonomous. It's an autonomous region. It's called a special administrative region. So it runs its own economy, its own legal system, and its own way of selecting leaders. And the current protests, of course, are driven. There are many interpretations. I tend to see it as being driven in part by a lot of economic grievances that also inequality, actually. There's a lot of undercurrents, but also these undercurrents have been politicized into dissatisfaction with the one country, two systems approach. And that's unfortunate. So obviously you cannot break that system. It's like trying to break the Constitution of the United States. So Hong Kong will need to, within the legal framework, within its constitutional framework, it needs to find, I hope it will, a way forward to solve these problems in a peaceful manner and in a manner that respects the rules that are currently governing the territory. And I'm confident eventually they will get there. I mean, these protests have been violent at times, but not nearly as violent as the ones being taking place in Paris. Mm-hmm. Not even close. and the police tactics not nearly as aggressive as the Parisian police. So I think in comparison, I'm rather sanguine. And,
Eric, please. Yes.
Can you just take that same discussion, Eric, to Taiwan and kind of how you see, because I think my own view is I think the West easily misinterprets where Taiwan is, where it's headed, the relationship, the one China policy, and how that actually is going right now, particularly in the face of an election here in Taiwan in the very near future.
Well, again, it's part of history. History is so important here. I mean, Taiwan China emerged after World War II in tatters. The country had 100-some years of horrible time, being invaded, colonized, and yet it emerged in one piece after World War II, luckily, in bad shape, but in one piece. So its goal is to reunify the Chinese nation, and it's part of national aspiration. And Taiwan, obviously, is a part of that. And the current Taiwan Constitution says that it is part of China. So it is an aspiration, you could say, on both sides of the strait. Although I do recognize there are people in Taiwan, a sizable part of the population, who want Taiwan to be an independent country. But as you know, these are very difficult goals. It's always, in America, to be independent from Britain, it came with wars and bloodshed and extraordinary violence. So this is not an easy proposition. I hope one day the Chinese nation will be unified in one. That's our goal.
But Eric, so you gave an interview for NRC in which you mentioned that the legitimacy of the Communist Party, which has total control of your country, is based because of the people. It's the people of China who legitimizes the Communist Party, right? But talking about of what Michael mentioned, if you read other reports of what's happening in China, there is a politics of fear. There is this surveillance, the credit system. There's even a kind of gulag, re-education camps. I mean, what's the real legitimation of this Communist Party?
Well, I think the legitimacy of any ruler or any rule on a long-term basis must be rested upon whether it delivers for a vast majority of the people that they govern. Okay? If they fail to do that for long duration, they will lose their legitimacy, period. And this is something not to be complacent about. And my analysis is that the party has been successful so far is because they have this sense of crisis, this sense of they're not complacent. They keep thinking, what can we do to keep delivering? That's what I worry about liberal societies, because they have, as an outside observer, okay, I'm not, the liberal societies have these rulers, these elites, that somehow take their legitimacy for granted. So they say, we're legitimate because we're liberal. Liberalism grants us legitimacy, doesn't matter, no matter what. And you're illegitimate because you're illiberal. Therefore, so that kind of complacency, I think, may defeat liberalism, which will be unfortunate. I like to see a world where there are many different ideas of how to govern, but I mean that will be the danger of liberal societies. Current Chinese party and the state are not in danger of that because they are constantly have this sense of crisis and how to deliver, and that's what I mean by legitimacy.
There's a what you rest legitimacy on is, on the one hand, just an empirical question. All governments succeed only to the extent that they deliver in some way. The issue that you raise with Taiwan, I think, goes to the heart of a very important problem. And that is, if there are millions of people who want to govern themselves, does nationalism always trump self-government?
Well,
that seems to me a rather urgent matter, especially since the nationalism that would trump self-government is that of a one-party state.
Well, it depends.
And that's not a question of the problems of liberalism are evident, but the fact that liberalism or Western societies have enormous problems, and I come from a country where we have a very, very big problem, starting with the president. The fact that there are problems doesn't legitimize any other form of rule.
Well, that's exactly my point. The fact that we have problems doesn't legitimize you either.
I'm not asking. But I'm not asking you to legitimize me.
But let me take your point. Let me take your point. I think the issue here is how you define the people. Right? I mean, I define the people as the Chinese people, which includes Taiwan. So I mean, do you define the Spanish people as including Catalonian people? Then, if you define Spanish people, Catalonian people as part of Spanish people, then you will say that their aspiration for self-governance would be illegitimate because people in Madrid have a say as well in Barcelona, right? But I mean, I know it's a debatable issue. You can debate that. You could come to me and say, Taiwan is not a part of China. I would disagree with that, but that's the issue that we're debating.
But you can still say that Taiwan is a part of China, but if the vast majority of Taiwanese want to govern themselves and establish their own rules.
And the vast majority of people in Shanghai don't believe that. And we have a say in that too, just like the vast majority in Madrid also have a say in how Barcelonians should rule themselves. They think so, at least.
But then it becomes a
That's
question.
too abstract.
These are strong arguments. I'm treating them with respect. But then the issue becomes: how does this get adjudicated?
Well,
how does this get done?
I understand
China
that.
wants
I
to
hope
essentially
peacefully.
absorb Taiwan, but the worry that everybody has externally is that beyond these issues of political theory, this will come down to a matter of force, just as when the one China, two countries system ends in 2047, that a lot of people in Hong Kong who'd like to remain free will not be free. And a lot of people in Taiwan who would like to be free will not in the end be free. They will be unified, but on the conditions dictated by China. That's the issue, right? And I don't see a story here that begins to respect the longing for democratic freedom that you see in Taiwan and that you see in Hong Kong. That is a problem for you. It's how you get there. Even if you agreed that this is one China, you may have to live with the fact there are many Chinas.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, what do you mean we have to live with the idea of many Chinas? I mean, Hong Kong obviously has its own mini constitution, which I think in modern history is unprecedented. Mm-hmm. I can't find an example where one nation state could be so tolerant as to have its sovereign territory, a part of sovereign territory, completely ruled almost autonomously with its own constitution. So I think I'm optimistic that we could resolve these differences amongst ourselves. And let me also help, if I could, relieve your anxiety a little bit, as you earlier pointed out about the potential for Chinese dominance of the world. Let me say this: I will wager a bet today that in 25 years, when we return for the 50th anniversary of the Nesca Conference, that
You're very welcome.
that China will not be dominating the world at that time. And I'll wager that bet for two reasons. One is because I don't believe China intends to dominate the world. And number two is, even if they did, they would fail at it. Because we've moved way past beyond the age of dominance. I think it will be difficult for any one power to dominate the world. It's the wrong mindset. And let me, if I could, please let me finish my train of thought. You know, in 20-some years ago, I was still a youngster coming out of university. At that time, China was just beginning to, sort of barely joining the WTO, was trying to, emerge. And there was a lot of anxiety at that time, even. And I read one day, I was reading the Wall Street Journal, I think, on the left column. There was a picture of the Chinese grand strategist Zheng Bijian, who coined the term peaceful rise. And he said that China's aspiration is to rise peacefully. And I read that. I was very excited. I went out and talked to people and said, we're going to rise peacefully. and everybody was very, very suspicious and skeptical. And they attacked the idea and all of that. And to this day, I go out and say, peaceful rise, and people look at me saying, what are you smoking? Right? But let me just say this. In my lifetime, just in my career, peaceful rise has already happened. It's a fact on the ground. We went from, since I started my career in business, we went from a poor agrarian country to a behemoth that that is China today. Behemoth in every respect, okay? Yet, no country has been invaded, not a single shot fired, no violence. And if you look at human history, the rise of every power, from Athenian Empire to the Roman Empire, to the British Empire, to America's manifest destiny, to the rise of modern Germany and modern Japan, Ottoman Empire, every single one of them, their rise was accompanied by tremendous bloodshed, colonization, wars, massacres, okay? And China's rise to date has been bigger and faster than them all. Mm-hmm.
In fact,
but no war yet. So that's something to celebrate. I'm not predicting the future, but at least the achievement to date is something worthy of celebration and worthy of cultivating further.
yeah, I just as a, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with the principle. That's how empires get built. But the most effective form of empire building, which explains the pathology of all the world's great empires, a negative thing, is always through accommodation, right? It's just the problem is historians focus on the bloodshed and the violence. So there are obviously cases where the native population of Australia is essentially genocide, or mass murder anyway. But generally, the way in which things work are when people are incentivized to work with you. And that means that there are expansions of empires that are not just done through force of arms. Sometimes military is a very important threat to open up the doors, but things that are sustainable are about finding working exchange relationships with each other, right? So that's the reality of how empires really get built. And so the big question is, in what way is this metric of China and its massive economic power, what kind of stake is it going to take, and what should it take, right? And what does it want to take in a world that's changing very quickly, where it's a neighbor with Afghanistan, and yet has sat out of the story of the last 41 years. What role should China play as being part of the neighborhood, right? And why hasn't it played a role so far? And will it help make things better in Afghanistan? Will it help things worse? Will it listen, and who will it listen to in terms of shaping? You can replicate that question with every single country that China shares a border with, but obviously it's much more expanded than that elsewhere too.
The first step is obviously do no harm and peace. And I think China is dabbling at Afghanistan a little bit now. They're trying to host this thing.
Conference.
Yeah. But I don't know whether they'll succeed. But if you look at in 1949, when the People's Republic was founded, China had, I think, shared borders with 16 countries, land borders, right? China had territorial disputes with all 16 countries in 1949, right? Today, that number is down to 2, essentially 1, India and Bhutan. And Bhutan was a part of India, okay? So in the last 70 years, China has settled its territorial disputes with 14 of the 16 countries shared border with, all peacefully. With Russia, it was like centimeter by centimeter negotiation over a 15-year period.
Yeah, the single most important territorial dispute, of course, is in South China Sea, which isn't resolved.
Well, I'm talking about land borders, right?
Okay.
So therefore, no.
But we have an admiral here,
But
so he understands
what
the sea.
What I'm trying to say is that's something to celebrate, isn't it? I mean, I don't see a lot of precedents in history in all your countries what you've done to settle your borders, huh? So come on, cut us some slack. All right.